Segment 2, the Red Menace. The governor of Indiana speaking in February to the Conservative Political Action Conservative Political Action Conference, quote, "The American project is menaced by a survival-level threat. We face an enemy lethal to liberty and even more implacable than those America has faced before. We cannot deter it. We cannot negotiate with it. It is the new Red Menace."
Well, maybe it's overheated, and I hope, by the way, that I'm wrong. I hope the point is exaggerated.
Whatever it is, you got the nation's attention. The press really responded.
I keep hoping that someone wise will come up and say, "Now, Mitch, wait a minute. You've overlooked this or this or this. This is this problem of debts piling up to levels, the sort of Greece-like levels, or in prospect out there." Is nothing to worry about. It's going to work out for the following reasons. I haven't found that person yet. You know, Peter, my view is, and I think I said it in that talk, I've said it frequently, this is not, to me, at bottom, a philosophical argument. It's an arithmetic one. And so I say to people who believe in a lot bigger government, more intrusive government than I do, let's have that debate tomorrow. For tonight, can we agree that the mathematics does not work here? The machine will go tilt, and we'll all pay a terrible price, regardless of our...
When you say...
Yeah.
Here's what's in back of my mind. Back of my mind is George W. Bush. You were back home in Indiana by this point, but George W. Bush devoted more or less the first 18 months, almost 2 years of his second term, to talking about the danger of Social Security going bankrupt. It was going to go bankrupt in some X number of years out. And he got nowhere.
Yeah.
And so, as a layman watching all this happen, I assume that one reason he got nowhere was that it did all seem so far out and so abstract. How do you make concrete to people what's going to happen? You talk about a survival level threat.
Yeah.
What actually will go wrong, and when will it start to go wrong? When will we feel it?
It could happen gradually, but it also could happen all at once and fairly soon. There's a great little line from Hemingway that people have been exhuming lately where the characters ask, "How'd you go broke?" And he said, "2 ways, gradually and all at once." You can't exclude, I hope this is remote, but you can't exclude that there'd be a sudden run on the dollar, loss of confidence, a la Lehman Brothers, for instance.
Right.
And in a wired world, this thing could happen very, very
You could have
quickly.
a meltdown that would make the meltdown of 2008 look minor.
Sure. But let's just exclude that for a moment.
All right.
It is there. I don't know at this point of anybody, regardless again their view of political philosophy, who believes that you can run any enterprise, private, public, small, large, with the kind of debt levels that we're headed for with absolute certainty. Sooner or later, your creditors run you. And so, there's all sorts of evidence that we'll have a permanently stunted economy, that the American dream of upward mobility, of one's children doing better than you did, will perish. And that'll lead, I think, to a loss of liberty. It'll certainly lead to a loss of influence in the world. It'll lead to much less national security than we probably really want to have. And so I think it's a problem we all share, whatever our differences on other questions. And again, I'm waiting, hopefully, for someone to tell me to calm down, and not as bad as I think.
So unemployment in Spain right now, 20%. Yeah. 1 in 5 workers looking for a job can't get one. In Ireland, it's moving up in that direction. In Greece, the numbers are unreliable, but something like that, if not worse. That could happen here.
I don't know how it doesn't happen if we wind up where those countries did in terms of the money they owe. So much of the entire substance of the economy going just to pay the interest on the bills you ran up in the past. So.
Okay. Let me quote you again, Mitch. Again, this is your CPAC speech. We know what the basic elements of reform must be. Sunsetting the major welfare programs of the last century when those currently or soon to be enrolled have passed from the scene. The creation of a new Social Security and Medicare compacts with the young. Sunsetting Social Security. the revered program, 7 decades old, given to us by the great father of us all, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You haven't just touched the third rail of American politics. You have given it a body hug.
Well, look, first of all, I chose that word carefully. It doesn't for a moment disparage the system we've had to say that it may have worked great for a long, long time, but it may not work well going forward. You asked me earlier, why should we believe that any of these things can occur? I'll give you some reasons for optimism. One of them is that dividing the programs, whether it's Social Security or Medicare, saying to those who are counting on them now or will in 10 years or 15 years, don't worry about a thing. A deal is a deal. You're good to go. That you're going to have exactly the program that you expected. But you say to the young people who are getting the massive shaft in this country the way we're headed right now, they are paying for today's retirees. Some people haven't caught on to that yet, but they are. Today's workers pay for yesterday's workers.
Right.
And they have no prospect at present of anything remotely equivalent waiting for them when they get to their elderly years. So here's the reason for optimism. Tens of millions of Americans have been through this already. Business after business over the last 10 or 20 years has come to the conclusion that the existing pension system or the existing health care system that they had, health insurance system, was going bust. And so they left it in place for those past a certain point, but they started a new plan. It's not radical. What would be radical and tragic would be to just leave this thing on autopilot, take everybody off a cliff.
Speech to CPAC again. You proposed a couple of good ideas. You quoted them as good ideas. One would be a new tax system. Again, to quote you, lower and flatter and completely flat is best. Now, you know politics as well as anybody, so I don't really need to remind you, but I will, that when Jerry Brown ran for the Democratic presidential nomination against Bill Clinton on a flat tax, he got wiped out. And when Steve Forbes ran for the GOP nomination on a flat tax, he registered 2 and 3% in polls with a margin error of 3 or 4%. Got nowhere. So you are arguing, I'm probing here. I just want to know are you saying here's something toward which we should aim as an ultimate idea, the way Milton Friedman would just say, I know this isn't practical, but someday maybe? Or are you saying circumstances have changed? There's an opening.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. First of all, I'm going to back up a half step and catch up quickly. Circumstances, I believe, have changed. Let's go back to the debt issue. And could you really talk about changing the so-called entitlement programs?
The third rail.
Why now? Why when President
George Bush got nowhere? Right.
One reason might be that we've had this little intervening event, a terrifying recession associated with debt, and everybody knows it. And almost every American either had a personal, up-close and personal encounter with debt, or their family member did, or their neighbor did, or the business they were in did. And I think we'll have a permanent change in outlook from folks who have looked in the mirror and thought to themselves, Grandpa was onto something when he said, don't borrow too much. So now, let me switch back to the simpler, lower, flatter tax.
Right.
There's also, this one I think is a whole lot easier, and you'll remember, I spent a great deal of my time in my service to President Reagan out advocating lower, flatter taxes. The rates came way down.
And we got them. The 86 reform worked.
That's
it did
right.
happen, yes.
That's right. And I'll also mention that this is one item on which I think economists across the spectrum, right to left, seem to agree that a more neutral system is first of all more fair, but the most important thing, and the reason it was in that speech, is we can do all the reforming that I might dream about. We can cut the federal government down in all the ways that we should. But if this economy does not grow
there's no
at a very rapid rate, and for years without much of a hiccup, we just cannot catch up to the debts that we've piled up. And that's the main reason And I think if you argued it to Americans, first on the basis that it would be simpler, a lot of us could resume paying our own taxes again, which only a minority. What an embarrassment that in our society, a dwindling minority of people can cope with the voluntary tax system. Not only be better in that respect, but that the main point would be more jobs and more hope going forward. And every economist around agrees with that. You might have a chance.
Okay. So the answer is you're serious. You're serious. You want to get this stuff done now. Well, we'll come to that. We'll come to that.
Did I act like I was joking?